I'm back on the 1950 this week. I got to knock out a bunch of the stuff to just finish up underneath the car, so it's not going to be a whole lot of great video. So we're just going to kind of cruise over some of that stuff, get some B-roll. Big thing that I got to do is need to get the shocks put on front and rear. We don't have the original mounts on the uppers. We can reuse what's on the suspension itself, but all that stuff's got to be brand new. I got to get this thing up in the air. I got to be able to take the torque arm out so I can finish welding that and make sure I can get some paint on it. Also should be able, now that the rear suspension's in, put the gas tank back in, maybe start running some fuel lines. I'd like to be able to get the sway bars back on front and rear. We'll have to just see what kind of space we got to work with there. It's going to be real tight, I know, so we'll just see how far we can get. As you can hear, it's very windy outside today. Pulling the engine and the transmission back out because I need a little more space to work on cleaning up the shock towers and stuff I welded on. I'm going to move those upper control arms down lower. I'm going to chop the top of that off to give us more room for the steering clearance and just more room in general as far as getting the engine and trans in there and make sure we got space to work and stuff. Also got to work on the firewall a little bit. I'm going to try to seal it up a little bit better. We put the steering column in today, just kind of temporary. I didn't even paint the brackets or stuff, but I have the brackets mounted so it mounts to the bottom of the steel dash. It's great side to side. It's kind of floppy up and down, so I need to make a panel that fits on the firewall that'll at least like hold it nice and tight. I would like to put a tab off of that, but then I'm not sure I'll be able to get it back through the hole. But if I make the panel and then just make a small tab with a single screw, it'll hold it really nice. Also have to pull the pan off of the transmission. We got a new filter to put on. It was just parts that came with the Corvette the way it was. We also got a kickdown cable to change out, which is good because we do need that in order to switch this thing over to being way more mechanical. Basically the way the stock throttle cables and kickdown was all hooked up, was all integrated into a traction control system on the 93 Corvette. So we had to eliminate all that, so we're just gonna have a single cable from the pedal to the throttle body, and then the kickdown from the transmission to the throttle body. I talked about building it, but I didn't really show the torque arm. So this is what I ended up with, just 2 pieces of tube. We're gonna brace together here just to kind of hold center to center. It was just kind of cut enough chunks that I could work with. You know, we made the nice mount up by the transmission. That needs some finish welding up there. I'm gonna put a couple more welds along the length of this brace here, and then all of these need to get welded. I got some extra hanging off in places that all needs to be trimmed to just kind of final fit. It's just a lot easier to do it up here on the bench than it was under the car. And now that I'm pulling the engine transmission back out, this is my opportunity to get this cleaned up, finished, put some paint on it before everything goes back in the car. Okay, I've gone a little off the mark here. Chopped the top off from where it was in that upper location. I went to move it down. Oops. I went to move it down to this hole. So originally up here, which that one, the bolt goes right in. However, the spacing's a little different where it used to bolt onto the chassis. So I had to drill this other hole. And then it's hollow behind there. I just happened to pick a spot that actually cleared the original reinforcement, which is right here. So I'm using a piece of that reinforcement as what's keeping the bolt from rotating, and then I cut off a chunk that was the front. Was the front, because this was actually kind of mirrored to the other side. So I took this piece, cut it through so that I could put it here so that bolt's supported all the way around and it helps it keep from rotating again. And at this point, I think I'm just gonna hammer this whole edge in as much as I can, and maybe I can just run a couple of weld beads across the top there and everything will be sealed back up and strong. We're gonna lose a little bit of anti-dive, which again, for the handling of this car, doesn't matter. We're gonna get that arm into more of a level or even just barely uphill, so we've got better camber gain than where it was ending up with ride height as it was. And then I gotta get in here and clean up all of this around that shock mount just to make it look a little bit better, and then I can get in there and shoot some paint on it before putting all this back together. trying to get the steering shaft working. I ended up having to cut apart the old steering shaft. Luckily there was enough U-joints, but I had to mix and match by disassembling some to get different ends. One of the old ones actually fit the steering rack, and then went to a 3/4 round, but I needed to make adapters up here to extend this steering column out. I actually have an old piece of swedge tube that happened to fit inside of there, that's then got a piece inside of it that then is located inside of this square D or double D, and got that where it's pretty straight in there. It might be out by a few thou, but it'll be plenty close enough. Plus it's got the slip joint up in here, so it'll take up any little bit of misalignment. Now the important part here is that we have our U-joints synced together so that the speeds stay the same when turning. And this is the first time I've set it up like this, but this seems like a pretty easy way to make sure that they're lined up. I've just got a straight edge clamped to a socket on each one to square it up. There might be a little bit of twist and play in there. I probably could have used something stronger, but we're going to be in the ballpark, and that will minimize any speed changes due to the U-joints rotating. Well, there it is, the steering shaft in. Got a couple of good news and bad news. Bad news is I accidentally drilled threads out of that while I was trying to cut down the double D that's in there. But if this is going to be an issue, you can get a smaller nut and chop that bolt down a little bit if I have to. The other one is that the motor mount bushing doesn't quite fit now. The good news is that if it's interfering with this, we know it's not going to clear anywhere close to the exhaust manifold. So that won't be an issue. But I've got this Delrin I can make my own bushing out of. This one should clear. If I have to just trim a little edge off, I can. That'll be easy enough, and then we'll have functional steering and be able to put the engine back in. Anybody want to take a guess at what I'm doing right now? I only have a handful of failed attempts. Tried multiple heatings with spraying lube on them. It wasn't penetrating into them rotten manifolds. So tried the welding trick, which obviously didn't work, multiple times. Now I'm on to drilling, and at least that's going fairly well so far, but I've only got 2 out of 6, so we got a ways to go. Now on to the worst one on this side. But I got it cut off and then ground down flat. Now I'm center punching it. Get a nice start hole. Gonna have to work our way up in drills. Starting fairly small. Once I make it through, I gotta get to where I can see how well centered it was. That was actually pretty good. I'll step up in size. If there's any mismatch, I try to compensate for that in drills. Notice I got full covering on because drill bit, hot, sharp chips all over your hand, arm, and face suck. And of course we take out the tips fairly often. The first one went pretty easy. I also heated that one the most out of all of them, so maybe I got the bolt to anneal. Trying to use an easy out as I go, just in case it actually comes out. It's not working. Yeah, fucking half the bolt's still in there. 2+ hours. But all 6 are drilled out and they got threads, so I'm sure they're not perfect, but hopefully they're all straight enough to make sure the exhaust bolts up. Now I gotta find studs. Say one is at least pretty straight because got it drilled close enough to just take the threads out. To save from any potential safety hazard, where we had to cut the clearance on this bushing for the steering, I drilled and tapped a hole in the hole next to the motor mount one. That way I can bolt it in place so it won't rotate. And this is purely just that, you know, if it came loose driving down the road and if it had enough vibration, it might actually cause it to come loose and spin, at which point, if a sudden change in direction had to happen, there's potential you wouldn't be able to steer. There, now it's locked in place. The engine's back in for hopefully the final time now. Real happy with how everything bolted back up even after finish welding on the torque arm and stuff. And I did add a 1/4 inch of height to the motor mounts and that worked out well. I just want to do that as a little bit of safety for a little extra on the steering shaft, which if I hadn't, it might have been really tight. But at this point, just happy to have it in, like I can start assembling other things around it. Our EFI computer and wiring showed up. I've got the new wiring harness for the whole body and everything on the way. Probably gonna end up diving into that in the next video. Beyond that, there's, you know, we got tons of little things yet. Like I gotta run brake lines. I still gotta figure out what I'm doing for fuel for the EFI pump in the tank that was on this car, which is not one that's original to the car. So we're just gonna have to see if I can mount it to what's there, or if we'll have to switch to something like a chassis mounted pump. I'm fine with either one there. It's just a matter of getting, you know, this thing plumbed in lines. Most of the radiator stuff should be done at this point. I've gone through that and added brackets to the frame here. However, you know, I got to take care of a lot of the engine bay stuff yet. Still don't know what we're gonna do with inner fenders, but I know I'm gonna go to a firewall mounted brake master, so that's gonna be a big part coming up, and just trying to make sure we can get everything connected so this thing's drivable again.